All right, good evening and welcome to the Souhegan River Supplemental Watershed Plan Environmental Assessment. I'm Jeremy Fowler from the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service. I'll be facilitating the meeting this evening. Joining us within the room are State Archaeologist for NRCS Tom Boyd, State Conservationist Travis Thomason, Matt Brown, State Conservation Engineer, and Mr. Ken Finmore from New Hampshire DES Dam Bureau. Joining us online is Eric Neese and Scott Duncanson from GFT. We'll be going over this environmental assessment. Before we get going, I just want to share my screen real quick. Eric, if you can just allow me to do that for a second here. Just to show you an overview of Teams. You can see this in the room. On Teams, there is a Q&A feature up in the upper part of your screen. If you need to ask a question, please feel free to do so. The cameras and microphones are muted by default. If you'd like some time to talk to us live, there is a raise your hand feature next to it as well. You can raise your hand. That will let me know that we need to enable the camera and microphone for you. Other than that, there is a chat option as well, but please keep your questions, specific questions, in the Q&A. So that's all I have on that. And opening up would be State Conservationist Travis Thomason. Travis.
Hey, welcome everybody. Grateful that you're all here this evening. We look forward to hearing from everybody regarding the proposed project, and it's just part of the overall process that the agency goes through on projects like this. And we're anxious to hear from you as we go through an overview of the proposed project and hear the public comments if there's folks out there. And I'm going to turn some time over to Matt for kind of the duration of it. But we're grateful you're here and grateful for your feedback on the project.
Yeah, thanks, Travis. My name is Matt Brown, and I'm the State Conservation Engineer in New Hampshire. We've been spearheading this project for about 6, maybe 7 years. It's been a long process. COVID in there, a couple other interruptions and government shutdowns and whatnot. But we're here. We're kind of seeing the finish line on this planning study that New Hampshire DES has joined us in partnering to complete. And our friends at Gannett Fleming have been working diligently over those years. We've already received a few public comments just in the short couple of weeks that the plan has been on our websites and this meeting was advertised. And so I encourage folks to continue sending those comments in. You can send them to me. My information will be included in the slide presentation. It's also in the meeting announcement, I believe. Is that right, Jeremy?
That is correct.
Yeah. So yeah, please send in those comments and we'll work to get those answered and addressed in the plan. Without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Ken Finmore from New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. Oh, yeah.
Just before we take that away, I do want to just make everybody aware this meeting is being recorded. It will be posted on YouTube. The link will be provided to DES and on our New Hampshire NRCS website. So if anybody is looking to see what happened during the meeting, it will be.
Thank you. Yeah. Kent?
All right, I'm Ken Finmore from the Department of Environmental Services. I've been administrating the contract and managing the project. Glad to see we've gotten this far and it's done. Looking forward to the potential of getting some funding to do design work. One or more of the dams that are being studied here.
All right, I'm going to hand it over to Eric, GFT, to do a little bit of screen sharing for us here. Eric?
Yeah, let me share my screen and hopefully you tell me if you're seeing a picture of Site 25B on your screen now.
Good. Yes, we are.
All right, terrific. Well, welcome everyone. Again, my name is Eric Neese. I'm the project manager with GFT on this project, and we're excited to share where we are with you on this project. It is the Souhegan River Supplemental Watershed Plan. It's a study to evaluate potential improvements to four flood retarding dams. They are sites 12A, which has a north and a south embankment to it, and sites 25B and site 26. And as I go along here, these are the things I kind of want to cover. Just give you a quick overview and of the project and the purpose of the project. Then go over some of the deficiencies that we identified with each of these dams and some typical repairs that other dam owners with similar problems have used to solve these same issues. And then review the preferred alternative for each of these dams, and then have an open discussion at the end. So I think Jeremy already covered this. You're joining this, for those of you joining virtually, you're joining using the Teams app, and there should be a chat or a question and answer button in the top toolbar. And if you click on that question and answer button, it should bring up a sidebar that lets you type in any questions or comments that you may have. I encourage you to type those in as you think of them, and then at the end of the meeting, we'll go over those and do our best to answer those for you. So please type in anything that comes to mind. So the purpose of the project is really, I have the four main topics up here listed. And the first one, I think, in my opinion, is the most important, which is to bring these dams into compliance with current dam safety regulations. Now, that's not to say that they were built improperly. These dams were built in the 60s, and the regulations have changed since then. We've learned a lot about dam engineering since that time, and the regulations have changed, and now we need to bring these dams into compliance with the current regulations. So that is an important component of this project. Also, the dams provide flood prevention for the people downstream. They store water and reduce downstream flows, and in doing so, they provide flood reduction benefits to those people that live downstream. So that's an important component of what these dams do, and we want to make sure that we maintain that function with this project. Likewise, Site 12A, and I'm going to go over each of these sites individually in a couple of slides. Site 12A also provides water supply for the town of Greenville, and we want to make sure that whatever we do doesn't impact that water supply source. And there's also another component here where we have the opportunity to modify Site 12A to provide river flow conditions that are consistent with the Souhegan River Water Management Plan. And again, I have some slides on this that we'll talk about in a little more detail. So if you're not familiar with the site, what I'm showing here on the right-hand side is an overview map of the entire Souhegan watershed. The watershed is in this image, it's a little grainy, but the watershed is all colored in different colors. This image came from the original watershed work plan from March of 1961. And throughout the watershed, NRCS planned a number of different flood control dams. Many of these were just single purpose dams, meaning that they're solely for flood control. But there are some of the dams that have dual purposes, which is both flood control and either wildlife development, or in the case of Site 12A, they also provide that water supply component. So if we zoom in a little bit more, and you can see the dams are in the upper end of the watershed, which is typical for NRCS dams. If we zoom in a little bit more on these areas, you get a little better sense for where they're located in the world, and maybe located to those of you on the call here. All three dams are located in and around the town of Temple, and they're all north of the town of Greenville and east of Route 45. Site 12A discharges to Richardson Brook, which eventually discharges into the Souhegan River. And then sites 25B and 26 both discharge into Blood Brook, which eventually discharges into the Souhegan River upstream of the town of Wilton. And then the Souhegan River continues downstream through Wilton and then through Milford. So I have shaded here on the map in a red dashed line all those stretches of the river and those creeks that are receiving benefits from these flood control dams. These dams are reducing peak flow rates along these reaches of the Souhegan River. So they are providing a great service to the community. Now, with that, though, also comes risk, because these dams are sitting there full of water. And in the unlikely event that one or more of these dams would fail, there's the potential that that flood wave that's released from these dams could impact numerous homes and businesses. This is what I'm showing on the screen now is the breach inundation map for Site 26. And the Site 26 dam is all the way on the left-hand side of the screen. And all the colors here, the pinks and the blues, are areas that would be inundated by the flood wave if this dam would fail. And within that zone, there are 276 residential dwellings and 76 commercial structures and numerous roadways and utility infrastructure and things like that that would be impacted by a water depth of more than 3 feet. And because of that, there is the potential that the failure of this dam could result in loss of life downstream. And with that analysis, this dam then becomes classified as a high hazard dam. Now, the phrase high hazard doesn't mean that the dam is in poor condition. In fact, these dams are very well maintained. The classification of high hazard is solely related to what are the consequences if it were to fail. And I think this further bolsters my initial comment that public safety is one of the most important parts of this study, because what we're proposing here is to bring these dams into compliance with current dam safety standards, which should reduce the possibility of a dam failure. So I think that's an important thing to realize about what we're trying to accomplish here. If you're not familiar with what a typical NRCS dam looks like, I'm showing you a cross section through the dam and the embankment. And the embankment is shown here in this greenish brownish color on the right-hand side of the screen. And the embankment's typically constructed of soil or maybe rock or maybe different types of soil. For this example I have shown here, I have an area called an embankment core located within the embankment. And that is a zone of highly impervious material like a clay. And that's there to reduce and slow down any seepage that wants to move through the embankment. So the embankment can look a number of different ways, but this is kind of typical for NRCS. If you move into to the left on this screen and you look in the reservoir, you'll see what we call a principal spillway riser structure. That is how water that enters the dam is allowed to pass through the dam. Water enters this principal spillway riser and then falls to the bottom and then passes through the dam, through the principal spillway outlet conduit, and discharges at the downstream toe of the dam. And that's kind of how water moves through this structure. Now, many of these riser structures have an orifice on this upstream face of the riser that sets the normal pool, meaning there is a permanent pool of water in these structures. That pool is not there for aesthetic purposes, although they do look nice. But it's there, it can serve a number of different purposes. First and foremost, it is there to collect sediment. So when it rains and water flows into this dam, it's carrying silts and sediments and gravels. Those type of things are allowed to settle out in this sediment storage zone, which is the darker blue on the left-hand side of the screen. And in doing so, the dams also provide, in addition to providing flood control, can provide improved water quality to the downstream reaches of the Souhegan River. Now, in the case of Site 12A, this sediment storage zone also functions as the water supply for the town of Greenville. So that water supply component is also incorporated into that zone. Now, above the normal pool is what we call the flood retarding zone. And this is the area that fills up when it rains and provides the attenuation of flood flows that creates those downstream benefits from. So when it rains, this flood retarding zone fills up and flow passes through the principal spillway riser and then out through the principal spillway conduit. This flood retarding zone is intended to store storm events up to and including the 100-year storm. So a lot of water can be stored in this zone. If there's a storm larger than a 100-year storm, it's allowed to pass through the auxiliary spillway. And the auxiliary spillway is really there just to protect the integrity of the dam, because what we don't want to happen is for these large storm events to overtop the embankment. And I'm going to talk about this more as we go forward. When an earth embankment dam is overtopped, that is not a good situation, and it puts the dam at risk of failure. So it's very important that the auxiliary spillways are adequately sized to pass these large storm events. So that gives you a little overview of how a typical NRCS dam functions. Next, I'd just like to give you an overview of the dams that we're talking about here today. Just give you a little virtual tour. On the screen now is site 12A, and you see an aerial view of the reservoir. And at this site, we actually have two dams. We have the North Dam, site 12A North, which is at the north end of the reservoir, which is really just a satellite dike that is needed to fill in a low area to form this reservoir. And then at the southern end of the reservoir, we have what we call the 12A South Dam. And that is where the principal spillway and the auxiliary spillway is located. And both of these dams form the Greenville Reservoir, which is also known as the Toby Reservoir, which is used for, again, both controlling floodwaters and for the water supply of the town of Greenville. Now, I have a lot of statistics here on the right-hand side about the dam. I'm not going to read all those, but I will note that this is the shortest of the dams that we're going to talk about today, at about 36 or 37 feet in height. This is a view of the upstream face of the site 12A South Dam. You can see the riser structure, which sits there in the left center of the screen. That riser sets the normal pool of the reservoir. There's also the water. I mentioned this is for a water supply reservoir, so you can see the water intake structure there that the town of Greenville uses to draw water out of the reservoir. And if we just take an aerial view of this dam, this is the same dam. We're just now, if you think of yourself as up in a balloon looking down on the dam, again, you see the riser structure. The reservoir is in the top center of the screen. The riser structure, I have another enlarged view of that. There's actually two orifices in that riser that set normal pool, one on the upstream face and one on the downstream face. On this photo here that you're looking at in the top right corner, you're looking at the orifice on the downstream face of the riser, which you can see there's a trash rack there over that orifice behind the leaves there in the bottom right corner of that photo. The dam has a principal spillway conduit that goes through the embankment, and it discharges at an impact basin downstream at the downstream toe of the dam. And there's a photo there in the bottom left of the screen showing that impact basin. That impact basin is intended to dissipate the energy of the flow coming out of the pipe, so that the flows can then enter the receiving channel downstream and move downstream at non-erosive velocities. And then we have the auxiliary spillway, which is at the right abutment of the dam, which is on the left side of this picture. And as we go through this presentation, if I reference left and right, we're almost always looking downstream with that. So this auxiliary spillway is at the right abutment of the dam, even though it's on the left side of this picture. If we move over to site 12A North, this is just, again, another earthen embankment. Has we're looking across the crest of that right now. The reservoir is on the right-hand side. The downstream slope of the dam is on the left-hand side. And again, an aerial view of this. There is a low-level outlet at this dam that's not used very frequently, but there is the ability to, if you had to, open a valve and activate this low-level pipe, which is the middle pipe in this photo in the bottom left of the screen. And then you see Route 45 there coming along the bottom, across the bottom right corner of the screen. So that gives you a little sense for what the north embankment looks like. If we move over to site 25B, this dam is a little taller. It's about 64 feet in height, but basically constructed the same way. It's an earth embankment. It has a riser structure on the upstream at the upstream toe of the dam, and a pipe that runs through the embankment and discharges into a plunge pool at the downstream toe. And again, here, the auxiliary spillway is at the right abutment of the dam. And this is just a view looking across the upstream face of the dam. You're on the left-hand side of the dam here, looking downstream at the embankment. You can see the riser structure, and in the distance, you can see the auxiliary spillway, which is at the right abutment. And again, just an aerial view of Site 25B looking straight down from above. Shows a lot of the same things that we just looked at in the last two slides, but this image does show you another view of the riser structure and what the outfall of the principal spillway conduit looks like there, where it discharges into the plunge pool. And that plunge pool is there to dissipate energy coming out of the principal spillway conduit, so that when the flow enters the natural stream channel, it's moving at non-erosive velocities. Site 26, again, looks an awful lot like Site 25B. We have an earthen embankment with a riser structure and a principal spillway pipe that discharges into a plunge pool. The one difference here is that the auxiliary spillway is actually tucked off to the left side of the reservoir. It's not immediately adjacent to the earthen embankment, and I have that labeled here. I guess the other thing to note is this is the tallest of the dams that we're looking at today. This embankment is about 76 feet in height. Just a view of what that dam looks like from standing on the ground. You're standing at the right abutment of the dam, near the crest of the dam, looking upstream at the reservoir. You can see the riser structure, and then that clearing in the background is where the auxiliary spillway channel starts. And again, another aerial view, just looking straight down at the dam embankment. Again, another view of the riser and that principal spillway discharging into the plunge pool. So with that, hopefully you have a little better sense of what these dams look like and how big they are. And with that, I'm going to move into what are the deficiencies that we noted with these dams. And again, I point out that these dams are not in poor condition. It's just that the regulations that we need to comply with today have changed since these dams were built. And we identified basically 4 deficiencies that are the same for each dam. Each dam has inadequate conveyance capacity, meaning that it's at risk of being overtopped during those large storm events. Each dam has auxiliary spillway integrity concerns, meaning that the auxiliary spillway is at risk of erosion during those large storm events that activate the auxiliary spillway. And then there are concerns with the internal seepage collection and conveyance system and the materials that were used to construct that system, and that they may not be compatible with the earth embankment material that's around them. And I'll talk about all of these in much greater detail as we move forward here. And then the last concern is that these embankments did not meet the minimum factors of safety that NRCS requires. And that does not mean that the embankments are not stable. It's just that they do not meet these minimum factors of safety that are imposed by the various regulatory agencies. So why do we concern ourselves about these? It's interesting. NRCS did a study back in 1983, and this is a little dated now, but it gets the point across. The deficiencies that we identified with these dams are probably the top 3 reasons why dams fail, according to this study from 1983. We have spillway erosion, we have embankment overtopping, and we have seepage and piping concerns, which is that tow drain concern that I mentioned earlier. These 3 items added up to 74% of the known dam safety incidents that were recorded by NRCS back in 1983. So these are well-documented failure modes for earth embankment dams. So it is important that we address these. Embankment overtopping, probably one of the biggest concerns that a dam owner has to deal with. This is a picture of an embankment, an earth embankment dam being overtopped. And really, under this situation, the only protection that this dam has against failure is the vegetative grass cover that's on the downstream face of the dam. And while that can be effective under maybe really shallow flows and short durations of overtopping, grass just cannot stand up to long durations of overtopping and high depths of overtopping. And the likely outcome of something like this would be a failure of the dam. And that's what happened to that dam that I showed you on the picture prior. It actually failed, and the contents of the reservoir were released uncontrolled, causing flooding downstream. So failure by overtopping is a concern. And ASDO actually put out a little video of dam overtopping. It's a little cartoonish, but it gets the point across. And I want to show that here next.
I think you might have to reshare with the audio enabled, Eric.
Is this not coming through?
Not hearing the audio, no.
Ah. Hold on. Sound. All right. You still see my screen? No. Hold on. There you go. You still seeing my screen now again?
You see your screen?
Good.
Past large flood inflows.
There we
Let me
go.
back up. Let me back up and start this over. Sorry about that.
Dams are designed to store runoff resulting from heavy rain. When storage has reached a specific limit, spillways are designed to pass the excess floodwaters, initially through a primary spillway. Many dams are equipped with an emergency spillway to help pass large flood inflows which exceed the capacity of the primary spillway. In an extreme flood, flows can exceed the combined spillway capacity, spill over the top of the dam, and create a very dangerous situation. Overtopping flood flows can rapidly erode down into an earthen embankment dam, leading to an uncontrolled release of the stored waters and causing catastrophic flooding downstream.
Okay. Well, that was a good little video. So what can we do to increase conveyance capacities at dams? And really, I'm showing you here in the bottom left corner of the screen the Weir equation, and this is your one engineering lesson of the day. This Weir equation is everything you need to know about increasing conveyance capacity at dams. And it involves a factor called Q, that's the flow that you can get through the spillway, a Weir coefficient, which is the C value, the length of the weir, which is the L value, and the height of the weir, which is the H value. And the image I have on the background is actually the auxiliary spillway of site 12A. You're looking upstream. this photo. And I have the length shown and the H shown. So those are the two values that we can kind of play with here with this Weir equation to increase conveyance capacity. So if you increase the length of the spillway or the height of the spillway, you can pass more water through the spillway. And we're actually going to do this at both sites 25B and site 26. We're going to slightly increase the top elevation of the dam so that the dam is not overtopped during these large storm events. Now, if there are restrictions that prevent you from either widening the spillway or deepening the spillway, there are other things that we can do. This is an option. This is a project at Rawson Dam in Massachusetts, where the dam owner decided to simply armor the downstream face of the dam with a non-erodible material. So all this concrete you see in the foreground here is armoring that was placed on the downstream face of the dam. And it just creates a shell over the embankment so that when this dam is overtopped, the embankment does not erode and you don't have that risk of an uncontrolled release of the contents of the reservoir. So, and this is actually what we're proposing at site 12A South, and I'll get into that in a few more slides. So those are some of our options for increasing conveyance capacity. Another concern that I mentioned earlier for these dams is spillway integrity, meaning that these spillways are at risk of eroding during these large storm events that activate the auxiliary spillway. This is a photo of Cottonwood Creek Dam in North Dakota, where that spillway erosion is occurring right at the time of this photograph. And you can see all this erosion that's occurring in the lower end of the spillway that is eventually migrating up towards the crest of the dam. And if this erosion would have been allowed to continue, you would have had a failure of this dam through the auxiliary spillway. And to give you a little sense for this here's another photo of that same erosion. That is a 40-foot wall there that's been created by the water eroding away the spillway. So you can imagine if that erosion was allowed to continue upstream, you would have released a 40-foot wall of water out of the reservoir. So this is a known failure mode, and it's a concern. This is another image of South Fork Dam 17 in West Virginia after a storm event, and you can see that the spillway erosion in the center of the screen here that had started, but fortunately did not continue upstream far enough to actually cause a failure of the embankment. So what are some things we can do to address spillway erosion? Dam owners have done different things. On the photo on the left here is New Creek Site 14 in West Virginia, where the dam owner, again, this was an NRCS dam. Both of these are NRCS dams, actually, chose to armor the spillway with roller compacted concrete steps. So to safely get the water from the crest of the dam all the way down to the valley floor and below the dam. On the right is Huntsman Lake in Virginia. This is in Fairfax, Virginia, where the dam owner chose to armor the entire spillway with a non-erodible material, which was, in this case, articulated concrete blocks. And in doing so, you can prevent the spillway from eroding during these large storm events. Now, there's another option as well. You can put in a cutoff wall in the center of the spillway. This is a photo of Little White River Dam in South Dakota, where the dam owner is installing a sheet pile cutoff wall right across the spillway. Now, it's a little hard to tell where this is at, but this is in the spillway. And for this option, the reservoir is on the right side of this photo, and flow would be going from the right side to the left side. So for this option, the dam owner acknowledged that they were okay with some erosion in the spillway on the downstream side of this sheet pile cutoff wall. So on the left side of the photo here, if this spillway ever flowed, you might get erosion up to this cutoff wall. However, that cutoff wall will prevent that erosion from moving and migrating any further upstream, reducing the chances of it compromising the integrity of the dam. So this is another option, and it doesn't necessarily need to be constructed out of sheet pile. Here's an example of a dam owner in Chester County, Pennsylvania, Hibernia Dam, where they had a low area on their spillway. This is an artist rendering of showing the auxiliary spillway. You're kind of hovering above the auxiliary spillway looking upstream. And the left side of the spillway, or the right side of the spillway on the left side of this photo, bedrock was falling off. And that was an area where you could get erosion and a failure of this dam through that side of the spillway. And they chose to install a short height concrete wall at that location to interrupt that erosion and prevent it from migrating upstream. And then eventually, this image shows what that would look like after you did the excavation and constructed the wall. But then you would backfill this area, and it would look something like this when you're all said and done. You wouldn't even really know it was there other than you could see the top of the wall. And we're actually proposing this concept for site 25B, only the wall will extend across the entire width of the spillway. Another option, instead of building out of conventional concrete, like a concrete wall, you could use roller compacted concrete to create this cutoff wall. And roller compacted concrete is a pretty unique form of concrete. It's a very stiff concrete that once you place it, you can immediately put a roller on it and compact it. So it's not there to be an impervious barrier. It's there to be a structural impediment to this erosion that's moving upstream. So in this artist rendering, imagine you've dug a hole in the middle of the auxiliary spillway and you've excavated down the rock, and now you're building back up with this roller compacted concrete material. And eventually all of this will get filled over with soil and seeded, and you wouldn't even know it was there. However, if this spillway would ever start to erode from the downstream side, which would be off the left of this screen, that erosion, when it hit this RCC mass, the erosion would stop and the integrity of the dam would be maintained. And we're actually proposing this concept at site 26B, at site 26 in the auxiliary spillway. Now, on to the last two deficiencies that we noted, which were embankment slope stability and the material compatibility in the tow drain. This is a typical cross section through an NRCS dam, and it's an earthen embankment that's built over bedrock and some soil overburden. This is kind of a typical NRCS dam. And what I want to say here is, the tow drain, this is probably one of the more important components of this design. That tow drain serves a very important purpose, and that being, when we have an earth embankment dam and it's impounding water, that water wants to move downstream. It wants to move through this earthen mass, and it will, and you will get seepage through this embankment. Now, as that water moves through the embankment, it creates what we call the phreatic line. And above the phreatic line, the soils are dry, and below the phreatic line, the soils are wet. And with any good dam design, we want to try to maximize the soils that are dry and minimize the soils that are wet, because dry soils have more strength than wet soils. And that tow drain helps keep that phreatic line as low as possible in the embankment. Now, a typical tow drain that was built back in the 1960s might look like this. It consists of a perforated pipe surrounded by coarse aggregate. And then beyond that, you have the earth embankment for the dam. Now, when seepage starts moving through the embankment, it may want to carry soil particles with it, depending on how fast the seepage is moving. So these little red dots I have on the left-hand side of the screen represent little soil particles that are moving along with the seepage in the embankment. And under this design that we have shown on the screen, as that seepage moves into the coarse aggregate, it can carry those particles with it. And if those particles get into the drain pipe, they can be carried away and removed from the dam entirely. And that's not what we want, because those particles are supposed to be in the dam. And now that they're not, we now are creating voids in the dam. And if this situation is allowed to occur long enough, you can create a situation, what we call piping, where you can actually erode a hole through the embankment without even knowing it. So having a properly designed tow drain is important. Now, under today's standards, we typically require what we call a dual aggregate tow drain. And that is the same, it's very similar to what was constructed in 1960s. We still have the perforated pipe and we have the coarse aggregate around the pipe, but now we add a sand filter, a very fine material around the coarse aggregate that separates the embankment material from that coarse aggregate. And with this, that sand is designed so that those little particles that the seepage is carrying with it do not make their way through the sand. But here, all those particles are captured by the sand so that they remain inside the dam embankment where they belong. And this is a situation that we need to kind of resolve here at all three of these dams. These dams have the old style drain, tow drain, and we need to bring them up to current design standards. And that can be done by simply abandoning the old tow drain and then adding a new dual aggregate tow drain at the downstream toe of the dam. And that's what you kind of see here on this screen. This is a cross section through a typical embankment. And what we'll do is we'll go in and we'll strip off the topsoil off the embankment and then add this dual aggregate tow drain at the bottom, which is the pipe wrapped in coarse aggregate wrapped in a sand. And then we'll take that sand and we'll extend it up the face of the dam to create what we call a chimney drain, so that any flow that's seepage that's coming through the embankment is going to hit this, and then that water will flow down the sand layer and into our tow drain and be safely carried away beyond the embankment. And then we can fill over all of this with earth fill at a flatter slope than what the dam is currently at. So in doing so, we solve two problems. We solve the material compatibility of the tow drain, and we also solve the factor of safety issue with the downstream embankment slope. And here's an example of that, something like that being constructed. This is New Creek Site 14 again in West Virginia. This is a rather tall embankment, probably similar to Site 26, 25B and 26. And this is looking down at the downstream toe where the contractor has excavated for that tow drain. In this slide, he's installed the bottom layer of sand, and then has placed the first course of coarse aggregate in the middle. And that's what the roller is sitting on right now, the coarse aggregate. And you can see the sand, which is the lighter colored material just outside of the coarse aggregate. Then that perforated drain pipe was placed. And then that drain pipe was covered with more coarse aggregate. And then that coarse aggregate was covered with more sand. So we kind of we create this burrito effect of sand and coarse aggregate layers so that any seepage through the embankment has to pass through that sand layer. And then that sand layer was covered with earth fill, but the sand layer was allowed to continue to extend up the slope here. And you can see this band of lightly colored sand between where the dozers are and the earth embankment. That's our chimney drain that is going to extend all the way up all the way up the embankment slope. And here's another photo a little farther up the embankment. And that's how this chimney drain would be built, and what the typical construction might look like to install something like this. So with that, I've gone over the deficiencies and typical solutions that some other dam owners have used to solve those same problems. So now I just want to quickly look at how those solutions apply to our project. And we're going to start with site 12A. And again, we'll start with the North Dam. This is an aerial view looking down at the dam. We've seen this image before. And what we'll propose here is flattening the downstream embankment slope and installing a new tow drain. So everything in red represents new fill that we'll be adding to flatten that embankment slope. And if we look at a cross section, so take a cross section, basically saw cut this dam in half and look at it from the side, it'll look something like this. And this is very similar to the cross section I showed you earlier. In fact, it's the exact same cross section. We're adding, we're stripping off the material, the topsoil from the downstream embankment slope, adding our chimney drain, adding our dual aggregate tow drain, and then backfilling the slope to a new flatter condition, a 3-to-1 slope. And in doing so, we can solve all of the issues with this dam with these improvements. If we move over to the site 12A South embankment, our proposed solution here is to take the crest of the dam and lower it to the same elevation as the auxiliary spillway, and then add our roller compacted concrete armoring to the downstream face of the dam. And in doing so, what we're saying is, okay, this becomes our new spillway. If we get a big storm event, water will just flow over this RCC embankment and enter the stilling basin and then continue on downstream safely without compromising the integrity of the embankment. We'll then backfill the auxiliary spillway because it's no longer needed. So that flow, when we're done, flow will not go through the existing auxiliary spillway. And again, if we take a cross section through the center of the embankment here to show this RCC fill, kind of looks like this. There's a lot of lines on this image, but basically the red is the new roller compacted concrete. The dark dashed black line is the existing ground surface. And you can see our new roller compacted concrete actually goes at the downstream toe, it goes below the existing ground surface. But for the most part, the RCC is placed beyond the existing limits of the embankment. And then under the RCC, we have that dual aggregate system again. We have the coarse aggregate directly under the RCC, and then under the coarse aggregate is our fine aggregate, the sand, so that any flow coming through, any seepage coming through this embankment will be filtered. I can show you an example of something very similar that was done at Upper Decker Site 1 in West Virginia. You're looking upstream at a dam that's a little taller than Site 12A. Maybe it's consistent with something like Site 26. But this dam had the same problems. It had inadequate spillway capacity, and it had an auxiliary spillway that was at risk of eroding. And we did the same thing. We armored the entire downstream face with our roller compacted concrete, and then filled in the auxiliary spillway on the right-hand side of the dam. And if you take a little closer look at this from the side, this shows you what some of the roller compacted concrete looks like. It's typically placed in lifts, 1-foot lifts, and we create a stepped pattern here. And that step pattern helps dissipate energy as water flows down over this. And then we also include a stilling basin, which is on the right side of this photograph, to help dissipate the energy of all that water coming down these steps and allowing it to discharge into the receiving creek at non-erosive velocities. Now at Site 12A, we're proposing something a little bit in addition to this, and that is we're going to cover these RCC steps with 2 feet of topsoil and then seed it. So when we're done, it'll look very similar to the way it looks now, and that is to address cultural resources concerns. So um, that is one caveat from this picture that's a little different for what we're proposing at site 12A. Now, also at site 12A, NRCS would like to modify this structure so that it can provide a release pulse during extreme drought conditions. When in extreme drought conditions, the Souhegan River flow can get very low and the water quality in the river becomes very poor. So it would be helpful during those times if you could release a slug of water downstream to help improve the aquatic habitat that lives in the river. And the goal here is have a release for a 2-day period that releases between 37 and 47 CFS from this dam. And we looked into that and we felt that it can be done. And we're actually I'm going back to this original picture of how an NRCS dam works. We can kind of steal 2 feet of storage from that flood retarding volume and use it for this release pulse. So essentially what we're going to do is raise the normal pool by 2 feet. And we're going to do that by adding basically a stop log structure in front of the orifices that set the normal pool. Now, the concern might be with this is, does the dam still function properly if you take away 2 feet of the flood retarding volume? And we analyzed that, and we found that the 100-year storm is retained below the auxiliary spillway, which is what we want. So we feel that this is a viable option. And how we'll do this, how we'll raise normal pool is in front of those orifices that set the normal pool on the riser structure. And there's 2 of those orifices, one on the upstream face of the riser and one on the downstream face. We'll construct this metal structure that will accept stop logs. And when we place the stop logs in this metal structure, we'll essentially raise the normal pool to the top of the stop logs. That'll be the normal operating condition of this reservoir until you have an extreme drought and you need to release water. And in this case, you can simply pull out the stop logs and create that release that you need downstream. So those are the improvements that are being proposed as a preferred alternative at site 12A. At site 25B, the proposed improvements look like this. Again, we're looking down from an aerial view onto the dam. And our proposed improvements are what just showed up here in red. And we're proposing to raise the top of dam ever so slightly, about 9 inches. And that really just involves like filling in some low areas. So it's really a very minor raise. We'll also flatten the downstream embankment slope to a 3-to-1 slope and then add those toe drains like we talked about before. At this dam, we're also proposing to replace the riser structure because it was not under seismic conditions. It was found to be not stable. So the new riser structure will look just like the old one, only it'll have a larger base at the bottom so that it will remain stable during a seismic event. And then in the auxiliary spillway, we're proposing to move the auxiliary spillway crest downstream and add a cutoff wall. And I've kind of touched on this earlier with that dam at Hibernia. And I'll show you a cross section here coming up of what we're proposing at site 25B. So again, with that auxiliary spillway option of adding a cutoff wall downstream, we're basically saying we're going to accept some damage to the spillway if we get that huge storm event. And we might get erosion in that area that just showed up in that ellipse, but above the cutoff wall, the spillway is going to remain intact and the dam will not be compromised by spillway erosion. So if we look at a couple cross sections here, we'll look at one through the embankment and then one through the auxiliary spillway. This is a cross section through the embankment. It looks very similar to what we talked about previously. We're going to strip off the topsoil, add our chimney drain and our dual aggregate toe drain at the downstream toe of the dam, and then flatten the downstream slope to a 3-to-1 to improve the embankment stability. In the auxiliary spillway, I think it could look something like this. We believe rock is fairly shallow in the spillway. So a conventional concrete wall is something that could be a very viable option here. And if you build this wall, the spillway is flowing from the left to the right. And what we're basically saying here is anything to the right of this spillway could be eroded during a large storm event, but this wall will prevent that erosion from moving upstream to the crest of the dam. And that's what we want. So those are the improvements at site 25B. At site 26, again, a lot of the same things. This is an aerial view of the embankment. And our proposed improvements here are just raising the top of the dam ever so slightly by about 0.4 of a foot, which again is really just filling in low areas on the crest of the dam, flattening the downstream embankment, and adding our new toe drain. And the cross section through this dam would look almost identical to what I've shared with you on the past 2 dams. So I don't have that cross section, but I will mention that we will be replacing the riser structure here for the same reasons as at site 25B. And the slight difference here at site 26 is how we address the spillway erosion in the auxiliary spillway. This is an aerial view of the auxiliary spillway. You're looking downstream through the auxiliary spillway. The reservoir is there on the bottom of the screen, and the dam would actually be on the right, to the right of this image. And what we're proposed there is that RCC cutoff wall in the auxiliary spillway. And here in this case, it would look something like this. We would need to excavate down a hole in the auxiliary spillway down to good competent bedrock. And from there, we would build our roller compacted concrete structure up in lifts. And the top lift would be maybe a foot below our finished grade. And then we would backfill this whole area with soil. And when we're done, you wouldn't even know it was there. If you walked over top of it, you wouldn't even know it. And I can go back to that Beaver Creek Dam example that I showed you earlier. This was the artist rendering where we showed the RCC cutoff wall in the auxiliary spillway. This is actual photos of the construction. This is a dam in NRCS dam in Chester, Pennsylvania. The auxiliary spillway is generally here between these yellow lines that just showed up. And the flow in the spillway is from the left side of the screen to the right. And in this photo, the contractor has already excavated the spillway down to bedrock, which is where some of these pieces of equipment are here. And then from there, once you were down to bedrock, you can start building up these RCC layers. And in this photo, several of the first layers are already in place. You can see the RCC, which is this lighter gray color, which this roller is sitting on. To the left of that roller is this slope here, and this is that coarse aggregate that goes directly under the roller compacted concrete. And then under that is the fine aggregate, which you can barely see here on the very left side of the screen. So this is the same type of construction that we've talked about already. And just a few more photos showing the roller compacted concrete lifts being brought up to grade. An aerial view looking down. In this case, the flow in the spillway is from the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen. And then when they were done, they backfilled the whole area and covered it with topsoil and seeded it, and you don't even know it's there. And that's kind of what our goal is for the spillway at site 26. So with that, I am just about done talking. The last couple of slides here, I'll just cover project costs. We've estimated project costs for this that involve a number of items, both construction, engineering, project administration, costs needed to secure permits. And these costs that are shown here are for all four dams, site 12A north and south, site 25B, and site 26. So these costs, this captures all of those projects. And from a construction, well, I should say here, the columns, the federal assistant columns represents the funds that would be funded by NRCS. The other fund columns here is the responsibility of the sponsors, which would be New Hampshire DES. And then we have our total costs over here. So total construction costs over $30 million. Engineering could be 6 to 7 million. Project administration estimated at about 1.5 million. And then with adding in permits, this could be a $39 million project when it's all said and done. And as our last slide, just going over the schedule. As I mentioned, as you know, Matt mentioned earlier, we're coming to the end of this project, and the draft watershed plan EA was posted on the NRCS website on July 16th. We're here at the final public meeting, which is today, July 23rd, and we're asking that any comments that those of you in attendance might have are received by no later than August 10th. Once the public comment period is over, we'll be able to finalize the plan EA, which could happen this fall, September maybe. And then the project would move into the design phase, which would be preliminary and final design, and then ultimately into the construction phase. And these phases may be dependent upon whether or not funds are available through NRCS. But regardless, you can see the design phase is at least a couple years to do these designs, and then construction. Each of these dams could probably be constructed in one construction season. So we've allowed like 3 years for a construction phase there, but you can see that we're still a ways away from any actual work being done on site. With probably the earliest construction could begin was probably be the year 2030. So with that, I am to the end of speaking here. I hope you found it interesting and informative. But again, if you do have comments, you can send those to Matt Brown, who is a state conservation engineer for NRCS. His email is here on the screen, and I think it was also in the notice for this meeting. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeremy to see if there's any comments in the question and answer box.
Hi, thank you, Eric. We do not have any questions or comments from our online audience, and nothing from within the room here.
Okay. Is there anything that from the room there that you guys are in that you'd like to either expand on, or if there's something I missed? I will not be offended if you bring it up now.
Ken, any questions, Matt?
Nope. It looks like you have someone now.
We just have one come in, yeah. How and who will operate the stop logs for the in-stream flow program?
Well, it looks like we would have to have some of our operators from the Dam Bureau. They have to be in the boat, get to the ladder on top of the riser, and they would manually remove the stop log and then have to put it back in.
All right, if you have a follow-up question, please go ahead and type. Anything else?
One thing I will touch on, my name is Thomas Boyd. I'm the Cultural Resource Specialist for New Hampshire NRCS. Eric touched on it briefly that one of the concerns for the dams was the aesthetics of each of the dams and to return them to the integrity that they are today based on the National Historic Preservation Act. In working with the New Hampshire Division of Historical Resources, we have identified a series of dams expanded beyond just these 4 dams as part of a historic district. that would be national eligible. With National Register eligible with the National Register of Historic Places. And with that, because we are restoring the dams based on their current aesthetic and keeping with that integrity of them being earthen dams, we've identified it as being no adverse effects for each of these dams and the project. If there are any questions or further clarification for that, you can still direct those comments to Matt Brown and he will direct any questions to me.
Thank you, Tom. Matt, any words?
No, nice job, Eric.
Oh,
Thank
Wayne is asking a question here. Wayne asks, is the existing site 12A riser opening sufficient for the ISF release or need to be deepened?
With that alternative where we showed the stop logs, we actually found that we had to basically lower each orifice about a foot. So we made each orifice about a foot taller in order to get that release, the target release rate that we wanted. So yes, the existing orifices would have to be modified slightly to meet that requirement.
Great, thank you, Eric. Any other questions, please go ahead and send them in. Travis, do you have anything?
Thanks for everybody's time.
Yeah, thank you very much. We'll give it another couple minutes here, but please take note of Matt Brown's email address. Public comments will continue to be accepted through August 10th. Hope Stacy and us up with one. Just saying thank you for including the in-stream flow requirements. Another 10, 15 seconds here. Time to hit the buzzer.
Appreciate everybody's time. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much, Eric, for that. It's a great job. And again, public comments open through August 10th. This video recording will be made available, sent out to DES for posting as well. It will be hosted on YouTube under the NRCS New Hampshire account. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to any comments that you may have. Eric, have a great night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Eric.
See ya.